Vinny, can you help me set up this Sony OLED for comparison against the LG OLED?
Are you taking the piss? I thought we did it last year.
Vinny, every year TV manufacturers come out with new TVs. It's just like you buying a new pair of glasses every year. Say, I haven't seen you wearing a new pair for some time now. Is everything okay? Is the calibration business still going well?
Yeah, I'm saving up for a Daytona.
Didn't realize you're into cars. Anyway, are you gonna help me set up this Sony OLED or what?
As a hooker might say after she's taken your money, let's get this over and done with.
Hello everyone, Vinny Teo from HDTV Test here. I'm a TV reviewer and professional calibrator. In this video, it's LG versus Sony OLED Round 2 2018 version. On my right is the LG C8, which features the South Korean manufacturer's new Alpha 9 picture processor, and this is the Sony AF8, also known as the A8F in the USA, whose main difference from last year's Bravia A1 or A1E OLED is the design. Now, ideally I would have loved to compare the same screen size, but as luck would have it, my LG C8 review sample is 77 inches, whereas the Sony AF8 is 55 inches, which makes assessment of upscaling quality more difficult. But I think what most video enthusiasts will be interested in is whether LG's new Alpha 9 processor can match or even surpass Sony's X1 Extreme chipset in terms of picture quality. But before going straight into the comparison, I'd like to thank UK electrical retailer Crompton & Moore for sponsoring this video. If you are thinking about buying a new TV, even if it's not the LG C8 or the Sony AF8, please support this channel by supporting them. I work very closely with the team at Crompton & Moore for the annual HDTV Test TV Shootout, and from time to time, they also loan me televisions to review, TVs that maybe some manufacturers are not willing to send to me for testing. I find the staff's knowledge of the products they sell to be excellent. They'll give you unbiased, independent advice for your purchase. So if you call Crompton & Moore on 01302 365 760 and ask for Richard, mention HDTV Test and he'll take care of you with great price and service. Thanks again for your support. After scrutinizing numerous heavily compressed video clips, the Sony AF8 consistently had the slight upper hand when it comes to near black gradation and noise suppression. In this episode of Father Brown from ITV, the dark walls on the AF8 exhibited less polarization and macro blocking than on the C8, even with smooth gradation turned off. In another footage captured untranscoded from satellite broadcast, I'd like to thank Mr. David Lane, who sells high-quality audio cables at flashbacksales.co.uk, for his help with these video clips. The black jacket had a smoother transition from one dark tone to another on the Sony. And finally, in this 2013 film Snowpiercer, again, the jacket looked more pixelated on the LG. New for 2018, LG has added a decontouring filter, which is meant to smooth out such polarization, and it does work to a certain extent, but the result is still not as clean as on the Sony. Also, because LG has put the decontouring filter under the MPEG noise reduction control, which also applies some spatial noise reduction, it affects more fine detail than the Sony, detail that videophiles would want to keep. Even on high-quality sources, the near black gradation on the Sony AF8 is superior compared with the LG C8. In this scene, quite early on from the 4K Blu-ray of The Revenant, I've purposely slowed it down a bit so you can see the difference. The LG C8 exhibited more polarization and tonal jumps than the Sony AF8 as the camera fades to black. To assess motion performance, let's start by looking at the smoothness of 24 frames per second playback, which is important for a cinematic experience when watching movies. In this slow panning shot from the Blu-ray of Wall-E as the spaceship travels from the left to the right of the screen, to my eyes, the LG C8 looked a bit more juddery than the Sony AF8, but it may be because it's more obvious on a 77-inch screen size. I stress that the slight judder on the LG77C8 is not telecinic judder, it's just the stutter inherent in 24p material. To clarify, True Motion is off on the LG, Motion Flow is off on the Sony, so we are testing native 24p playback. Should you choose to enable Motion Compensated Frame Interpolation or MCFI, in general, Sony's Motion Flow will introduce less interpolation artifacts than LG's True Motion. Here, I've set both TVs to their least aggressive MCFI preset respectively, True Motion Clear on the LG, Motion Flow Standard on the Sony. This is our own custom authored test pattern. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the difference because this clip is filmed through my camera and then compressed by YouTube. But from where I was sitting, there's less tearing and sparklies on the Sony. So far, the Sony AF8 seems to be winning, but the next few sections will go mostly to the LG C8, mainly due to less aggressive ABL or automatic brightness limiter. Let me explain what ABL is if you don't know. Automatic brightness limiter is a protective circuitry that's implemented mainly on emissive displays such as plasmas and OLEDs to better manage power consumption and prevent components from overheating. On such displays, if there's no ABL, then when a bigger portion of the screen gets brighter, the power consumption would go up unchecked and generate excessive heat because more pixels need to be driven harder. What ABL does is to dim the screen if the bright elements take up a larger portion of the screen. So for example, when measuring peak white, you may get 300 nits on a 10% window, but only 150 nits if the white fills up the entire screen. When we say that an ABL algorithm is less aggressive or more relaxed, what we mean is that a larger portion of the screen can get brighter before ABL kicks in. Now, as you can see from this test pattern, again, we altered this ourselves. Really, I should be in the business of producing test patterns and discs. I'll sell millions and never have to appear on YouTube and get people giving me shit. Anyway, as you can see from this test pattern, ABL kicks in on the Sony AF8 earlier. The difference in ABL algorithms has a major impact in HDR presentation. Basically, because of less aggressive ABL, the LG C8 generally looked brighter than the Sony in non-dark scenes, which is not helped by the fact that our Sony KD55 AF8 review sample only reached 600 nits of peak brightness on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point. I'm showing you this flame-throwing guitar sequence from Mad Max Fury Road, which is mastered to 4000 nits. The LG C8 looked brighter and more impactful than the Sony AF8. Note that sometimes the situation can reverse depending on the particular scene, because LG's tone mapping algorithm favors retaining specular highlight detail, whereas Sony's prefer to maintain APL or average picture level at the expense of sacrificing some specular highlight detail. For example, in this scene from the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray of Pan, the LG C8 lowered the overall brightness to retain the detail in the sun, whereas on the Sony AF8, the sun was slightly blown out, but the benefit is that the picture looked brighter. I think I've explained this before, that when a manufacturer tries to tone map high-nit HDR content to a display with lower peak brightness, they can choose to retain overall brightness or retain specular highlight detail. There's no rectified standard. There's no right and wrong here. It's just that LG chooses to preserve bright specular highlights, whereas Sony prefers to maintain overall brightness. Moving on, this is a paused frame from The Martian, which I wanted to use to demonstrate the respective bending removal technology on each TV. But the Sony AF8 looked a bit too dark, because its auto-protective dimming has kicked in to minimize the risk of screen burn, whereas I could disable the auto-dimming on the LG C8 from the service menu. Anyway, if you can see past the brightness difference, there's already less posterization in the sky on the Sony Bravia AF8 OLED, but engaging smooth gradation really smoothed it out without affecting fine detail. On the LG C8 OLED, engaging MPEG noise reduction improved matters too, but it's still not as clean as the Sony AF8. Also, some fine detail on Matt Damon's face is erased. I guess there must be some women of the Me Too movement who like that too. For gaming responsiveness, it's an easy win for the LG C8. Input lag measured 21 milliseconds in game mode. On the Sony AF8, 4K lag is not too far away at 31 milliseconds, but if you're playing 1080p games, such as from the Nintendo Switch, then the input lag goes up by an additional frame at 47 milliseconds, which will feel more sluggish than the 21 milliseconds on the LG. Putting on some HDR games, such as Assassin's Creed Origins on the Xbox One X, we see a similar behavior to HDR movies playing out. Generally speaking, the LG C8 will look brighter thanks to less aggressive ABL, but in scenes where there's a particularly bright object such as the sun, the TV will perform dynamic tone mapping to preserve specular highlights, causing the picture to paradoxically look darker than the Sony. If you found this video useful, please like and share it, and subscribe to the HDTV Test YouTube channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next year for LG vs Sony version 3.0. That's if I'm still doing YouTube videos. Peace.